Okay. All right, we're officially on. I do want to welcome Isla and then Faraz. Is that how we say your name?
Perfect. Well
Are
done.
you sure?
Yeah, it's
All
perfectly
right, that
acceptable.
was my first shot. So Isla and Faraz are joining me here from Kreos Brain Science, and I really do want to be respectful of their time. So we've got about 45 minutes on the call today, and I just wanted to walk everybody through what we're going to be talking about, why I wanted to choose this topic, talk a little bit about the June promotion that you're probably all getting emails about, who I am, but really to respect their time coming in from Kreos Brain Science, I want to introduce them. I want you to be able to ask questions about their software, about the testing capabilities, about why they think it's important that clinics like ours are using this software. Of course, this open forum is about cognitive changes. And what I'll say before I kind of turn the mic over to the two of them is the reason we're talking about it is because more often than not, in the waiting room of my clinic, I will run into a patient of some other doctor and say, "Oh, you're that brain doctor." And I'll say, "Yeah." And they're like, "I need to come see you." And I'm like, "Okay." And then I never see them again. So when it comes to matters of cognition and brain health, we are all so fearful of it. We're so aware of it. And yet we're not willing to take those first steps to say, what does it even look like? Right? We get B12 labs, we get iron labs, we get all of this information about our body, but we're so hesitant to say, is it working okay? And if it's not, why? And how do we slow this down? And because I see it, I mean, I can go to the grocery store or the farmer's market and I get stopped. "Oh, you're that brain person. I need to come see you." And then, it just stops there. And so what I really want to promote in the community is this environment of safety and recognizing that brain health can be preventive. We can slow progression of neurodegenerative diseases. And there's a lot more options for you and your loved ones than you might recognize. But we can't initiate those unless you come sit in the chair and learn about your brain and its health and what is considered standard. So that's my sense of urgency about it. Again, I do want to hand it over to Isla and Faraz. I have some questions if nobody else does, of course, to get the conversation started. No one's accused me of not having enough to say. But I do want them to, introduce the platform. If you guys could talk a little bit about it, the founder, I think he has a great story, the scientific backdrop of it and where you find the usefulness coming in. And thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having us. I guess just quickly to introduce ourselves. My name is Faraz. I'm actually the Chief Product Officer at Kreos, working hand in hand with our science teams to bring to life this platform that allows the assessment of cognitive function. And you'll see Isla is also on this call. Isla is part of our customer success team as well. So we're both on hand to obviously be part of this discussion and answer any questions. I guess just addressing the first question of like, what is Kreos and, what is this? What is that logo that you see near the top left or top right of our heads? I don't know which one. So Kreos Health, we're an online brain health assessment service that attempts to accurately measure core elements of cognitive function across 4 key domains. Okay, memory, attention, reasoning, and verbal abilities. And lo and behold, those are the domains that largely monitor or govern our quality of life day to day. Okay. Can we make good decisions? Can we reason about things in the world? Can we remember things and so on? Can I properly communicate with those around me and so on and so forth? Typically, there's kind of a couple of core benefits. One is that what we offer is not like a pen and paper test. Okay. When you think cognitive test, maybe you're thinking there's a person with a pen and paper in their hand asking you things like, can you draw a clock? Or yeah, there you go. See, like those are the types of assessments that typically come to mind. Ours is very different. Ours is more of a gamified task that has been adapted from classic neuropsychological tests, well, like in the 80s. And this dovetails into the Professor Adrian Owen conversation. He's our chief scientific officer. He, in the 80s, we believe he's one of the first individuals ever to take classic neuropsychological assessments and port them into a computerized format. And, there's a lot of advantages to doing so. One, he was able to do mass testing. He's an academic first. And, he's done a ton of research and published a ton of research and top papers on our tasks. We've even put people in like fMRI machines and have given them a tablet to take our tasks to associate the brain regions that our tasks recruit. So we have confidence that you're not just taking a task, you're actually measuring an associated brain region. There's a lot of science and underpinnings that have gone into the solution to bring us to where we are today. Ultimately, three core benefits for patients. I think number one, it's a really fun and engaging assessment, very different than a pen and paper. And number two, it's really actionable, right? So again, we're quantifying core elements of cognition and allowing you to track those over time. And there's so many use cases that underpin why that's important. Do you want me to get into those, or should I just pause a little bit, take a breather, and see if folks have some questions before we talk about the why and like, you know, why have we gotten so much traction today?
Over to the crowd here. I think, yeah, keep on going, wrap it up nicely. So we kind of, I think questions will come after that.
Sure. So why do we exist? You know, first of all, I think luckily for the world, the stigma around cognitive function slowly, not completely, slowly is starting to diminish, which is really, it's a really good thing because, you know, the care that we provide to, for instance, the older population, you know, the hospitalization rates are through the roof. And ultimately, sometimes like 11% of all hospitalizations in the US for those over the age of 65 are due to dementia. And usually it's the emergency room where dementia is first documented, if you can believe that. So many benefits to doing this. I think, as was mentioned earlier, catching it early enough means you can do things to slow the progression of that condition. And there's a myriad of things you can do surrounding life cycle intervention, sleep optimization. I'm sure, you know, I'm kind of probably preaching to the choir here. Mental health support, you can, you know, for there's so much mental health issues, and a lot of those issues have deep-rooted impacts on cognition. We've talked about aging and cognitive decline. In healthier, younger populations, it's important to have a baseline so that if you get into an accident or there's a concussion on the field or something, you can understand what the nature of that change was, and you can see when you're starting to progress back to baseline. I mean, there's so many use cases. It's hard to cover all in one session, but I think the world is hopefully slowly coming to the understanding that accurately obtaining an objective and accurate measure of brain health, no matter your age, no matter your circumstance, is paramount to your health, just like blood pressure is. And maybe that's just the bow on that.
Yep. Excellent. Really well said. I want to ask you really quickly before it runs out of my head as well, just to touch on quickly, if you can, you know, the accuracy of it. Because what I typically tell people in the most simplest of terms, if you have a neuropsych eval inpatient as the gold standard for diagnosing any mild cognitive impairment, and then you have the MoCA test, which is our handwritten test on the other end of the scale, I put the Craos Brain Science right about at 80%. That's what I've seen. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Just, you know, quickly just saying that's me saying as a customer, you know,
Yeah.
but tell them a little bit about where that comes from, the scientific backdrop.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so we have a myriad of papers, some of which compare our ability to capture impairment relative to these common tools like the MoCA or the MMSE. That's one side of it. The other side of it is we have papers that have pegged us against what would be a classic 2 to 3 hour neuropsychological exam. And we've proven in both of those cases to be far more effective. I'll give you a tangible example. There's a paper that was published about a decade ago on the 12 tasks that we offer that basically concluded that a 12-task Craos assessment is essentially comparable in the level of depth and information that you get out of a 2 to 3 hour neuropsychological assessment. And I don't know if you folks have ever been to a neuropsychological assessment. Boy, is it inconvenient, and it's hard to get a time, and it's expensive. So, you know, hopefully we're solving a big problem there. On the MoCA side or the MMSE side, so these pen and paper tests, they're not really designed to capture early impairment. So we did a study. We ran about 57 individuals over the age of 62 through both the MMSE and the MoCA and the Craos, like a smaller 2-task Craos health battery or 3-task Craos health battery. We caught roughly 30% of that population as being potentially impaired. The MMSE caught 1. And by the way, that 30% is, if you look at the stats from the Alzheimer's Association, is typically in line with what you would see generally across the population over the 65 from any kind of impairment, whether that's an MCI, early onset type dementias, and so on. So those are just two examples that peg us against existing tools.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's really helpful. Does anybody have questions for our Craos experts? As far as what that looks like, the development, the usage of your information, of course, post-COVID and in North Idaho, I have a lot of concerns about how are you using my demographics and my information? Are you using this in the research? Do I have to sign a consent? Do I have to be concerned about this for insurance purposes? So does anybody want to hear the answer to that, or Jeff? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, what was the question?
I think the biggest question is, are you using the information from people who are showing up as clients in your research? Are you using that for anything out of their, permission? Do they have to sign away anything? I know the genetic tests, right? Like 23andMe are hoarding all of their information to use that for research. And
That's right. So first of all, we are used by institutions who have extreme security requirements. I'm talking about like AARP is a client of ours, as an example. Top academic institutions who frankly have even more stringent requirements usually. The entire platform's end-to-end encrypted. I mean, you'd have to basically have our encryption keys, which by the way are like 14 characters long, and I don't even know how you would get a hold of that. And the other thing is that we don't actually have access to the patient data even ourselves internally. Now, sometimes on a de-identified anonymous basis, we'll look at the entire Craos database, not singular people, the entire Craos database, to ensure that our normative data is continuing to hold true after a 5 or 10 year, like a decade period where our normative data might actually change because the makeup of the population has changed or something. So the only analysis that we do is a de-identified aggregate basis, and that's only like every decade. Otherwise, we can't even access the patient data that exists in our platform.
And does everybody understand what normative data means? Is how we come up with the reference range. So, you go get your labs drawn and they'll say, hey, a normal reference range from iron is, 30 to 150. And they adjust those ranges every so often as well because of what normally comes across. So with Craos, they do age and gender match controls. So you're not going to compare your cognition with my cognition. I will win every time. Kidding. But you're doing this age and gender match control. So let's say something large, like a giant global pandemic, hits the universe. We're going to want to get new normative data out of that, correct? Because there's going to be new norms based on isolation and new illnesses. And a 60-year-old cognition score might be a lot different pre-COVID than it is post-COVID. And so those are really beneficial to the research community and the medical community. And the use of that information actually benefits the patients better. But I know it causes concern about, hey, where is this information being used and why do I have to submit my birth date?
Yeah. I mean, we never, I'll just put a stamp on this. I can't think of a scenario in my 8 years of being here where we've ever used patient data, aside from just improving the accuracy of the platform in de-identified aggregate data form. It's just not something we do. We don't sell that data to anyone. We don't access it on an individualized basis. So yeah, you can rest assured, again, given the level of the clientele that we tend to serve, that your data is safe and only accessible by your healthcare practitioner.
Great. Thank you so much. Isla, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just have Faraz on the call with me to take it all away. I'm just here to smile and nod.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you guys being on. You're more than welcome to stay as long as you'd like. I'll go ahead and take it from here and talk a little bit more about my practice and what I'm using it for and what people can kind of expect from the testing and move forward from there. But I really, really do appreciate it. You guys, they volunteered their time to be here today and answer questions. So
thanks, everyone.
Much for having us.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having us. Thanks, Dr. Duncan. Bye-bye.
Take care. All right. Does anybody have any other questions based on that intro about the software itself or anything else that would pertain to more of the logistics part of why I've signed up with them or the research behind it? to feel pretty self-explanatory. Okay, and at this point in time, I mentioned before, go ahead and you can unmute your mics if you want to, because I do, believe it or not, I like to hear the grunts and groans and laughs and whatever else may come. If I have a terrible joke, I want to hear laughter. It helps boost my confidence. So anyway, here's where I want to go with the rest of the conversation today is I've already kind of addressed at the beginning, why am I doing this? The reason that I'm doing this is because we're already too late by the time somebody's sitting in my chair. I've been in practice now going on 5 years. The amount of cognitive impairment and neurodegenerative disease that I practice is enormous. And my biggest come to Jesus moment for myself and looking in the mirror is, oh, I wish I would have known them years ago. And the most common thing that I hear is people are walking out my doors. I wish I would have met you 10 years ago. And it's so hard as a human to be like, I'm in preventive medicine. How do I get these people in my door sooner? How do we scream it from the rooftops is don't be fearful to come have the conversation. And what I can also say is the people who are proactive about it, and if any of you have been in my chair and you've taken the test and you've gone through it, I would say probably 75% of the time that we are proactive on cognitive impairment, I'm telling people, I do not think this is organic dementia. I'm seeing PTSD, I'm seeing adverse childhood experiences, I'm seeing anxiety, I'm seeing thyroid dysfunction, I'm seeing anemia, I'm seeing so many other physiologic or psychologic impairments that allow us to jump on it, slow down the progression, and actually affect maybe a diagnosis, if not a prognosis, if the diagnosis is there. But if we don't get that early testing done, then my hands are tied because I'm saying, well, okay, here we're seeing this decline. Here's what your score is. Let's start you on a medication. Let's radically change your diet. Let's jump into high, counseling. Let's get you a neurologist. Let's start to set up all these things. And we're in a hair on fire mode. My nervous system doesn't like my hair to be on fire. Your nervous system doesn't like your hair to be on fire. And your cognition sure as shit does not like your hair to be on fire. And so if we can back that train up to remove the fear from having the conversation about your cognition and what's happening, then there's a huge chance that we don't ever have to have the conversation, that we're early enough in that you're going to die with some sort of cognitive impairment that you don't even know is affecting you, rather than dealing with this on a very assertive basis. Conventional doctors, I want to talk about this. The most common referral I get is from a neurologist sending me a patient saying they have mild cognitive impairment, they have dementia, they have Alzheimer's disease. We're done. We sent them to a memory care specialist. We gave them their prescription for donepezil. Hey, why don't you go talk to Karin? Maybe she can help you with your diet, is literally the conversation that's being had. So while I appreciate the referral as they're trusting me to say, this is about all the tools we have in our tool basket, like Faraz was saying, could you imagine if it was backed up 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, where that we didn't have to get to that point? And so I do want to be really aware. And I'm really good friends with the neurologists in this area. So it's not a hit on conventional medicine. It's just they're in the same boat I am, as if it's too late to get there, their tools are restricted. Now, while I do feel like I have more tools in my tool belt to really dive into the lifestyle, into sleep optimization and dietary and exercise and anxiety and stress and trauma and all these other aspects of naturopathic medicine, having one arm tied behind my back is stressful. And so if the first time I'm seeing a patient is a referral from a neurologist saying, we've done all we can do, go see her and talk about, bread, it makes it really, really challenging. So I do want that to be, I don't want it to be fear mongering in any way, shape, or form, but I do want to have a lot of awareness out there that it is the end of the road, that diagnosis in the conventional realm. We don't have cures. We don't have medications that stop progression. We have palliative medications. It doesn't exist right now. And so being on the front end of that conversation, I guess I'm just saying it over and over and over again, is very important. The MOCA test and the MMSE, I know Faraz spoke kind of close. The MOCA test is a Montreal Cognitive Assessment, and that's a pen and paper test that you would do in office. So if somebody's concerned about their cognition and they're not computer literate, and I'll say, hey, can you check your email and play a game of solitaire? If those are two things that you can do, you can take the Crayo's brain test. If that's not something you are familiar with or capable of doing, then we do an in-person Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which is consists of draw me a clock. Can you name this animal? And why I do appreciate that test in some realms is I get to watch my patients do it. So there's a little bit of objective data where I'll have some patients who are just so anxious that they'll take the MOCA test and they'll score an 18, but I'll say, you would have gotten a 22 had you taken a deep breath here, had you calmed down in this moment, or you narrated a clock to me perfect out loud, you just didn't draw it on paper. So now we can see where the disconnect might be. So it does give me some really good objective data on how people process, how they're processing their thoughts, what part of their brain might be affected. So it's not a terrible test, but it's very, very limited. Not only that, I have patients with progressive dementia that have memorized somehow or another the MOCA test because it's the same thing every time. So while they can't remember certain things at home or their activities of daily living are off, they can tell me what a rhinoceros is 10 out of 10 times because they have those words memorized, they have the test memorized because it doesn't ever change. So there is a little bit of data that's missing in that because that's the only thing that sticks in their brain. I can't manage progression. What I love about the Crayo's brain science test is that we actually, like he talked about, there's a divvy up of different tests and games that are computerized that are attributed to different regions of the brain, but they're the same game every time, but it's a different iteration. So it's not like you can't cheat. Essentially, you can't memorize it, you can't cheat, and you can't outsmart it. So it gives us a very good assessment of progression, regression, stagnation, trending, things like that. The second test, which is an MMSE, which is a mini mental status exam, is very, very subjective based on provider. So I run that one as well. Oftentimes patients don't even know I'm doing it because I tend to do it conversationally in a visit to try to learn more about their mental status. And it's difficult because a loved one can kind of interfere with those results because, what's the president, and then they might not give them the answer, but they might sigh and roll their eyes, right? Everybody's sighing and rolling their eyes at that question right now. But whatever the case may be, there's little cues and hints and things that can kind of give that away. So there is a subjective piece of that per provider. The reason that I, as a provider, signed up with Crayo's Brain Science is because I love data. I'm a scientist. And if I want to know if somebody has a valid B12 level, I'm going to go run a B12 test. If I want to know if somebody has anemia, I'm going to check their iron status. And so if I want to know if somebody has cognitive impairment, I don't want to just trust myself. I realize that the subjectivity of that and the trust in a loved one and the trust in somebody's own account isn't enough for me to say, I'm going to diagnose you with this really scary disease and go down the whole rabbit hole when it could be PTSD, adverse childhood events, trauma, anxiety, depression, attention deficit disorder. These are all diagnoses I make much more often than dementia, by the way. These are all diagnoses that we're treating and coming to conclusions and improving quality of life that then rebound and improve cognition for folks. And so that's why I'm so passionate about getting on the front end of it, because I'd much rather diagnose a 70-year-old with ADD and have them go, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Break down crying in my office, which happens every time. No wonder I had a hard time in school. No wonder I had a hard time parenting. No wonder I'm so easily overwhelmed. And now it really makes sense that you've tested me on this and I can see the results. And then when we start treating and recognizing it, I remember where I put my keys. Oh, I remember I had an appointment tomorrow. I'm starting to be more present in my life. And so those are the most beautiful moments in my practice when somebody says, I am going to hug this diagnosis instead of being fearful of this one. But again, that prolonged misdiagnosis, I guess you could say, or not being aware of what's happening, it will cause cognitive changes. And the brain is plastic in a way that's very good and very bad. And it's good in a way that we can retrain it and we can create new neural pathways and we can adjust our orientation and our capabilities. And it's also bad in the fact that if we don't do anything, it will just continue on what is familiar. And then that might not always be positive for the patient. One of the questions I got in the chat box is, how long is the test? That depends. The very initial intake, which I call a first intake, is about 90 minutes. I always say, treat yourself like a houseplant. Make sure you're fed, watered, and you went to the bathroom. It should be 90 minutes of uninterrupted time, meaning your spouse can't be in there, your grandkids can't be in there trying to help you with the computer. Everything needs to be set up and then isolated in a calm environment. It's another plus for the test because you're much more calm and safe at home the majority of the time. Some folks aren't, they don't love being at home, and we can set up a third-party space for that. But it typically takes about 90 minutes to complete that assessment. That is a very thorough subjective questionnaire portion. Again, that's anxiety, depression, PTSD, perceived stress, alcohol and drug intake, attention deficit. If you've had a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, I include a Rivermead post-concussive questionnaire in there. So we can alter it based on your own symptoms, but it's pretty standardized otherwise. And then it's 12 games, 12 computer games that assess 4 different quadrants of your brain and its functionality. That's the initial test. Typically, the second test is exactly the same because the first test is not diagnostic. The first test is a baseline. Let's see where you're at. This is a snapshot. We're going to look at it. We're going to make some adjustments. Maybe we're going to compare that with your lab results. We're going to compare that with your anxiety depression score. Like I said, typically speaking, probably about 75% of the time, I'm not even treating cognition after the first test. We're dealing with the subjective piece, your anxiety, your depression, your lifestyle, your sleep. And then we retest in a few months and we see if we've seen any consistencies, trends, ups, downs, or others. If we start to see trends that are pretty drastic or meaningful, which I think is important, and Faraz could have vouched for this, a meaningful change from test 1 to test 2 actually does incorporate the fact that you're familiar with the test. So you haven't memorized it, but now you've done it before, you've clicked the buttons, I've seen this test before. So you're expected to do a little better on test 2, even if your cognition doesn't improve, but they factor that into what's statistically significant. So they're not going to give you a, hey, she did radically better after 3 months because she's drinking more water. They're not going to falsify that information. They're taking into account that little bit of disparity between test 1 and test 2. So test 2 gives us a really good comparison. Is anything that we're doing impacting your cognition and your test results, both subjectively and objectively? Test 3, that's the big one, right? Are we seeing these trends continue? Is it consistent with the treatment? Is it matching what we're expecting to see as far as improvement? Or if we do think there is some sort of organic cognitive change, and by test 3, we haven't made any growths or advances, you've been compliant with lifestyle changes, we're 6 to 9 months into certain treatments, supplementations, your blood work is normalized, and all the other boxes are checked, then we're really at a great opportunity to say, hey, I think you're at risk for having some sort of dementia progress. Let's talk about treatment options and slow this thing down. And then we have this really important conversation about what that looks like. Keep in mind, this isn't about 6 to 9 months of starting the conversation. This is years ahead of time of when you would get diagnosed by going into the emergency room, like Faraz said, or having to go to get a referral from your primary because something that they noticed in a visit. So it takes time to get there, but in the grand scheme of things, we're years in advance of when an actual diagnosis would have come based on accident. So it catches a lot. It's a great screening tool. If we do note in these tests that there's certain, I call mishaps, certain parts of the brain that aren't working, we give even more strategic guidance. And then we can pare those testings down to really just focus on those problem areas. So you don't have to take a 90-minute test every time. If you're flying through, verbal strategy or grammatical reasoning, but let's just keep those off the list. And we're just going to focus on the ones that really do show impairment and that we need to show improvement on. I'm going to pause here for a minute. 1, I need a drink of water, and 2, I'm not breathing.
Take a breath.
Let's open it up for questions. You can use the little hand down at the bottom of your screen if you don't have your screen on. If you do have your screen on, just raise your hand, and you can go ahead and ask some questions and learn a little bit more about whatever you want to learn about.
Yes, I had a question on the testing itself. Are any of these tests covered by insurance?
They are not.
Okay.
No, the testing, it is a third-party testing site. It's considered alternative at this point in time. But like Faraz alluded to, and I tell folks, the neuropsych evals are really expensive, even with your insurance coverage anyway. They can be up to thousands of dollars. And so I still refer out for those. I do want to be very clear about that. I still use conventional neurology. I still use conventional medications, pharmaceuticals if needed. And I still will send out for neuropsych evals because it is the gold standard for further on insurance coverage to say, okay, this is formally the diagnosis. But what I really like about this tool is that one, it keeps probably 50% of people from even needing that. Cause I'm saying, no, you don't have any of this. You don't have to go through that whole process. Or if I think you do, then we can get all the information necessary to move forward with that evaluation. Really good question.
Thank you. And how does one know when it's time to come in for initial testing? You know, you forget your keys, you run up and down the stairs 3 times trying to remember why you were going up or down. But everybody says those are common. So is that time to come in, or do we wait for some further kinds of symptoms?
It's a really good question. It's so individual, Denise, and here's why. You know, again, the scientist in me says, get a baseline. If you're worried about this in the future, if you have a family history of dementia, especially, right? If you're a caregiver of somebody else, get a baseline. If you are in a stressful situation, if you're, you know, think of anything that's going to impact your health in the future, then I think that is an appropriate time to do it. You know, if I had my way, truly just because of my profession and what I see every day, I'd make it standard at 65. You get a baseline cognitive score at 65 so we can stay on top. Why are we not looking at that like we're looking at your blood test results? This is an essential part of your function. And so if it's perfect at 65, hallelujah, let's do this every year. And we'll just keep doing it like we do your annual wellness labs. I know that's not accessible to everybody. My answer to that broadly is by the time you show interest or you're asking me the question of when is it time, it's probably time, because there's something in you that's saying, hey, I'd like to know a little bit more of this. And honestly, it's usually past time for most people because they're noticing things. You know, losing your keys, it can be normal, but if it bothers you, then that's something worth addressing. And maybe it's ADD, maybe it's stress because you're a caregiver, maybe you just moved and you don't know where the key spot is yet. And those are all things that you come in. And why I think it's beneficial, even in that benign of an environment, is if I can sit here and listen to you and spend 90 minutes with you, do this assessment and say, here's what I think is going on, and it's not dementia. And that anxiety piece reduces by 50%. And we look at your blood work and you become overall healthier, you actually lower your risk of developing dementia because your nervous system is at ease, because we don't have as much anxiety, because the stress has been reduced. So when we're looking at preventive medicine, it's, in my opinion, because this is what I do, it's one of the best things we can do is get a baseline. I test myself every year. I mean, I'm in it and I'm a nerd and I like to see what I'm doing, but I think it's so beneficial to say, how have things changed? What's affecting my health? What's my anxiety score now that my son is almost 5 versus when he was 2, right? Like what are these things looking like? How does my life impact this so that if something comes up in the future, you can? Along those same lines, and I might be answering somebody else's question, but like I said, no one's accused me of having too few words. Hypothyroidism, long COVID, stress as a caregiver, poor sleep, nutritional deficiencies, IBS, give me a diagnosis. Any other one that has something to do with anything other than the brain. Anything, heart disease, right? Diabetes, cancer. All of these have a cognitive effect. If you are inflamed in your body, if you don't have the nutritional needs, if your thyroid's not working properly, it is going to affect your cognition. So if you are sitting in a seat and somebody's telling you, I think you have cognitive decline, here's what you need to do, and there's no end in sight, and they never address the fact that you have a B12 deficiency, or you have a genetic SNP that doesn't allow you to use your B12, or you know, you have some sort of blood sugar dysregulation, then we hit those root causes. And you say there's no cure for dementia, but in my opinion, I think we're too late and we're missing the cure, which could be a root cause analysis. What else is happening that's causing the brain not to work? I would say 90%, which is a huge percent of men that come into my practice, come in because they have erectile dysfunction. And then we start talking about their brain. They're like, yeah, that's not working either. I'm like, they're both extremities. If the blood can't get to your penis, it's not getting to your brain. And so when we talk about these things, low libido, any sort of urinary dysfunction, you talk about why it's happening and what the physiologic imbalance is. It's the beauty of the connectedness of the human body, and that the brain is not protected from that. It is just as much a part of it, if not more than you might think, because it's getting all these signals from the body, right? Oh my gosh, I can't maintain an erection. Now I'm stressed and anxious and I feel sad. So now I can't remember where I put my keys. Now I think I have dementia, right? Okay, maybe it's a dietary thing. Maybe it's a blood flow thing. Maybe it's a testosterone imbalance. So there's not one aspect of health. I went into my profession thinking I was gonna be a brain doctor, and lo and behold, I talk about prostates just as much as I talk about brains.
Mhm.
And it's just nature of being a naturopath, I guess. So hopefully that answers your question and then some.
Mhm. Yeah, it does.
Anyone else have questions for me?
Talk about the process then, if we decided to sign up, how does this transpire? I mean, you said there's a test and obviously consultation, but kind of walk us through.
Absolutely. So right now it's a really unique time because I did decide I did decide I can't stop. I can't not say anything. I guess that's where I kind of came to. So this promotion is reaching out to the community, reaching out to our patient population, of course, and saying, come get the testing done. And so if you're a patient of the clinic, you would, call the front office. You say, I want to do the CBS testing. They send you a form that we have to fill out, and it has all the disclaimers in that. Of course, if you're not a patient of mine or you're not a patient of the clinics, all the legal stuff. Asks your name and your gender and your age. It also asks why you're interested in it. It's helpful for me. And the reason is I'm not using your information for anything else. But if you are not a patient of mine and you say, I want to do cognitive testing because I was in Vietnam, right away, my brain's going to go, okay, environmental toxicity, PTSD, like what else should I be looking for with this person that would indicate a root cause for any cognitive changes that we're seeing? How can I be holistically minded about this person, even if I don't get 90 minutes with them? So it's two different scenarios. So I will talk about if you're not a patient first. So if you're not a patient, you call the front desk. I want to sign up for this. They send you a form. You fill out the form. I get all of your information. And within the next 2 weeks, I'll be sending you an email from Kreos Brain Science saying, here's the first intake questionnaire. All the instructions will be outlined down there. I want you to sit in a room protected from anybody else, be fed, watered, use the restroom. Please no distractions, including cell phones. And you take this test, you're going to submit your responses, and then I get those. And then within 2 weeks, I will evaluate and interpret those. Again, this is if you're not a patient, evaluate, interpret those. And then I'll write you an email back with all of your results saying, here's my interpretation of your initial test. Again, it's not diagnostic, but as a baseline, I'm seeing you're operating at 60% of an age and gender match control. I see subjectively you're moderately high on depression and anxiety. Here's where I think some of these effects could come into play, and here are some recommendations I have ongoing. I'm always going to invite you to come be a patient at that point in time if you want to dive in deeper, if you want to actually get medical advice, if you want to do follow-on testing. So for the June promotion, it is hey, go ahead and get your cognitive score and see where you land. If you are a patient or you want to become a patient, then same process goes. Even if you are a patient, you call the front desk, say, I want to sign up for the test. They send you the form, you fill out the form, I send you the test, you complete the test. And then when I interpret those results, I'm going to reach out and say, I'd like to make an appointment with you. And you're going to come in, you're going to sit in an appointment, we're going to dive in deep to those results. I'm going to prescribe either nutraceuticals, medicines, supplements, lifestyle changes, dive in really deep as far as that goes. And then we're going to set up a testing reassessment schedule to say, I think you need to be tested every 3 months. I think you need to be tested every 6 months or every year, whatever that looks like. And then in that situation, those 3 follow-on tests are included in the $200. So if you're a patient within that $200, you get 4 tests and interpretations. And the only thing you pay for is that initial test and my time of service to obviously treat. If you're not a patient, it's the $200, you get the initial testing, and then you get the interpretation and generalized guidance on how to improve or sustain your cognition from there with an invitation to come back as needed. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. The biggest thing there, and I've trained the staff on it thoroughly over the course of the last couple weeks, is that the form has to be filled out. Otherwise you call in. I've had a couple people pay for the test and I don't know who they are because they haven't filled out the form on the back end. So I don't have anybody to email. I don't know their age or their gender to get actual results back. And so while the ladies are doing a good job, once we send the form out, if I don't get it back, I can't initiate the test. So that's the next step, is to actually fill out the form so you're on the list to get the test email.
And Dr. Karin, if we're already established with another doctor there at the clinic, do you coordinate with them or?
Absolutely. And so what that would look like, if your primary doctor here is either Dr. Hunter, Dr. Misty, or Dr. Ari, then you would still get that 4-test package for the $200, and you would just have what we call neuro consults with me after every test to evaluate and assess and then treat. And then typically what happens at that point in time is if cognition turns out to be a primary concern, oftentimes we'll shift over and I become the primary physician for a certain part of time or forever. If it's not the primary focus and you're still working on some other stuff, then what I would do is coordinate with those other docs and say, hey, the next time you run labs, could you add in a homocysteine and a vitamin D? Can you do some more blood work for me so I can get a better idea of how to treat this person's cognitive status? So we do really work together as a team there, but as far as the cost associated, that those other 3 tests are included in the initial $200, and then the consult fees are just same as always, as a time of service fee for my time to evaluate and treat. Along that line, if a person wants to become a patient and then does the testing after that, it's the exact same cost. So if you want to become a patient first, then you come in, it's a 90-minute intake. With me, it's just very thorough. Anybody who's a patient of mine knows it is very thorough. I run you down head to toe, every which way. And then obviously your primary concerns are leading the discussion. And then all of the fee schedules that our clinic has established are in place. And then if you want to do the testing after that, it's the same cost. It's a $200, what we call a subscription, for 4 tests based on whatever your schedule is, and then time of service interpretations. So if you want to hold off on paying for the test and you want to be a patient to see if you even need the test, you could back that up too, in that realm. What I will say is this is only lasting for June, more so just because of my time and bandwidth. I can't run this promotion forever, but I plan to do it either quarterly or biannually because I think it's really beneficial, and we've gotten a big feedback and big turnaround, and July is going to be a busy month for me. June, July, which is great. And I'm excited for that. But what I will say is I lost my train of thought. I need a cognitive test. Where did I start?
The June promotion.
The June promotion, if you want, if in September you were to reach out and say, hey, I just want to take this test as a baseline, then we would have to establish you as a patient first. And right now my wait list for new patients is about 3 months. So with that scenario, if you want to become a patient first to see if you even needed the test, it puts me in a little bit of a difficult scenario, but I couldn't address every single schedule conflict. I'm about 3 months out to seeing my new patients. So you could wait until that point in time, and then we can determine if you need the test. But if you wanted the test right now and you're not a patient, then this is the opportunity to do it. Hopefully I'm answering questions as I go.
And if we were to sign up now, would the testing occur in June or July?
It would occur in June, and then the assessment would most likely be the beginning of July.
Oh, okay.
So from today, just because of the feedback I've gotten and the amount of people who are signed up already, it's going to take me about 2 weeks to make sure I get all the testing out. And then I'm planning for another 2 weeks it's a thorough assessment. It's a very comprehensive analysis of both subjective and objective data, and then going through and formulating, no 2 people are going to get the same treatment plan. So I think that's the other benefit there, is it's not an algorithmic, hey, you need this or that. It's here's what I'm seeing in your testing site. I may ask you a few questions, even if you're not a patient, I might ask you a few questions. And even if I don't get the answers, it's, hey, reflection point, right? Think about, did you have traumatic childhood? Did you grow up impoverished, right? A lot of people don't recognize that as hardship. Were you in the military? Did you endure a divorce? Did you endure a loss of a parent at a young age? And so there are things when I see these scores, I may just write down a list of questions for your own reflection. And if you never come back to see me, my thought is that I'm at least planting a seed to say there's more to my health than just how I score on a test. Should I be looking deeper into this, and maybe I either make an appointment there or I go find a counselor, or, I go to a grief support group, whatever the case may be. So. So if there's no other questions, I am going to wrap up here. It's
I have a
about 12.
question.
Oh yeah, go ahead, sir.
We used to live in Hayden. Now we live in Western Washington, north of Seattle.
Okay.
We get over to Coeur d'Alene once in a while in the summer. How would that work if we signed up? Obviously, the testing's online, but as far as the consults, assessment, and that.
The consults and assessments, if you become a patient, I do remote care. So I can do telehealth consults. And then I just ask if anybody does travel into Coeur d'Alene anyway, try to make an appointment in person. I love to do an in-person assessment. There's so much more about an in-person physical exam and assessment that you learn from somebody. So at some point in time, I like to do in-person care, but I have patients all over the world. I see patients in India and France. And so telehealth does work and it's beneficial. It's just, that would be ideal, but we can do everything remotely up until that point.
Yeah, that's what I gathered, is that the assessment worked better if we were there in person. Yeah, we actually are both patients of Dr. Hunter
Wonderful.
currently.
Yeah. Okay, well, you guys, the email address to the clinic is on our website, cdahealingarts.com, as is the phone. So you can call in, like I said, this is kind of like the cap point to get signed up. So I'm going to give it about a 2-week buffer period. So if you sign up any point in the next 2 weeks or by the end of June, technically, you can get the test. But the very first step is to call in, pay for the test, fill out the form, and then we get the ball rolling from there. So feel free to call in. If you have more questions, feel free to email the clinic. They can forward those along to me. And like I said, share with friends and family. This isn't something that I'm making a ton of money. I would be really transparent about that. Like, I pay Kreos for their use, and there's clinics like they talked about that charge their patients upwards of $2,000 for this assessment. So this is not a financial gain for me. This is literally me sitting in my office every day, feeling like an emergency room doctor, saying, why am I seeing heart attacks after they happen? Why can't I be on the front end? And so by doing this, my hope is that with cognition, I can help raise awareness in the community that if you're thinking that you might want to talk to somebody about it, it's probably too late, and not too late in a bad way, but it probably means it's time. It probably means that, like, why not get a baseline? Why not establish there? If you're noticing something, it's always a really difficult conversation for people. Hey, I've noticed my friend, or I've noticed my sister, I've noticed my mom, how do I bring it up to them? The same way you would if they had a mole on their forehead, right? Like, hey, I've noticed that you're having difficulties with word recall and dates, and I really, really think that there's something we can do about this. Can I come with you to your assessment? Can I help you get signed up for something? I care about you, I love you, and I really want to make sure we're on top of this, because there's so many other reasons that we can have these difficulties. Left untreated, they become real. Treated, they don't exist. And that's the most exciting part of what I do, and probably the part that makes me cry the most often is, I just wish I would have known them 5 years ago. So I appreciate you all being here, and for the questions and the community. And like I said, share the information, forward the email, give a call to the clinic if it's something that you feel like you'd like to do. And I really do look forward to working with each and every one of you if that's something that feels good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Sunshine today in Northern Idaho.
Yay, yay.
Get outside.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.